part 2 of the live stream, which will become a video archive recording. It'll be 2 separate recordings for the Friday night Bible study for the 25th day of the 8th month on God's holy sacred calendar. It is the 18th day of November 2022 on the pagan Roman calendar. Now, last Friday night, we went through Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 2. We had some coverage of the book of Daniel, of the book of Revelation, and I've got to turn off another smartphone that could be replicating what we're trying to do. We actually came on, even though I didn't recycle that, what do you call it? I got 2 different recordings trying to occur here at the same time. There, we got rid of that. All right, so we should be okay. We started earlier tonight with part 1 of a recording, and we lost our signal. So we're back on now, and hopefully this is going to work okay. Let me review with you just a little bit of what we did last week. We mentioned how Israel was taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar, Chaldean emperor of Babylon, and among the captives were some children who were exceptional. Verse 4 of Daniel chapter 1 records those children as being kids in whom there was no blemish, who were well favored. They were skillful in knowledge and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science. These were Daniel and his 3 buddies, who in verse 6 are named by their Hebrew names of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But they were given Babylonian names, Chaldean names by King Nebuchadnezzar. They were named, Daniel was called Belshazzar, and Hananiah was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. And the Chaldean names are probably what most of you remember Daniel's 3 comrades as: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if you heard any of the old children Bible stories. But now, what mainly happens in chapter 1 and chapter 2, in chapter 1, Daniel tells the captain of the eunuchs that they don't want to eat the food that the king has all the other kids eat, that the king eats and he has all the other children eating. They say, they didn't want to eat the food that was not food, that Leviticus 23, it says, was not made for man's consumption. And now there's a little bit of noise outside the room where we are, but just grab my focus. We can talk to you. Hopefully those people will move. They're talking kind of loud outside the room where I'm transmitting from. I'm up in Virginia tonight on a trip. And in chapter 1, Daniel tells the king's captain of the eunuchs that they just want to eat vegetables and water, and they're allowed to do that, and they actually come out more healthy than the kids eating the pork and the things that weren't designed for people to eat. Chapter 2 is a very prominent chapter of Daniel where King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And in that dream, he sees this extremely tall statue. And it's got a head of gold, arms and breast of silver, and a belly and thigh of brass, and legs and feet and the toes of iron. Now, the feet has toes that are made of both iron and miry clay. And those two don't mix. And these are 4 divisions of, I need to ask some fellows that are talking right outside the window there very loudly. I need to let them know I'm doing a live stream. So, brethren, I ask you to pray for me just a second. while I walk over and ask them if they can step somewhere else. And, hey, you doing a 5-video stream? Yeah, I appreciate it, Joe. That's all right. Okay. Those fellows were real nice who were right outside my window. They said, I'm sorry, I thanked them. Just let them know I'm doing a live stream. All right, that's going to happen when we do some remotes once in a while. Once in a while, we'll have some problems where we get interrupted or the signal breaks. But thankfully, we cleared that up okay, and I think we've got a good solid signal. It looks that we do. I was mentioning how King Nebuchadnezzar, we covered this last week. He had this dream. He saw this great statue. He's very troubled by the dream. He calls in all the magicians and he tells them they need to tell him not only what the interpretation of the dream was, but what the dream was. And they had kind of a little bit of an argument there because the magicians wanted the king to tell them what dream he had. And they said, just tell us the dream, king, and we'll tell you what it means. The king said, nah. You'll just make up something if I tell you what the dream was. He says, the way I'll know the gods gave you the interpretation of what was my dream would be if you can tell me what the dream was, too. They argued back with the king. There's no man alive can do that. They can tell you what the dream was and the interpretation. The king was insistent that if your God is inspiring the interpretation of the dream, he will also be able to give you what the dream was. And the king, thinking that there would be no one who could do that, he just said, at sunset, by the end of this day, at sunset, which would be actually the next day, because I think he said that in the evening, by end of the day, the next day, or dawn, which one way or the other, all the magicians' heads would be cut off. But Daniel learned of this, went before God all night, told the captain of the eunuchs that he would be able to tell the king his dream and what it meant. And the captain brought Daniel before the king, and the king gave great honor to God and Daniel once he realized Daniel was not only able to interpret the dream, but to tell him what the dream was. Now, that's all in chapter 2. It's a very interesting story for kids, and even for, well, as we used to say in our old Bible story book, for kids from age 5 to 105. So that's covered in chapter 2. And what else is in chapter 2? Okay, we got as far over in chapter 2 as to where Daniel is explaining what the dream that the king saw was and how it means 4 great world-ruling kingdoms, with King Nebuchadnezzar being at the beginning of it, at the head of it, the head of gold. He was the first world-ruling kingdom, or he was the leader, the emperor of the first world-ruling empire. And after him, there would be others. We're going to pick up today where, let's go through this. Let's review this. Even though we covered it last week, Daniel went through with the king how there would be 4 world-ruling empires, beginning with him, King Nebuchadnezzar, as the head of gold, and after him there'd be another, the Medes and the Persians, as the second world-ruling empire, represented by the silver. And then after the Medes and Persians, there would be a third world-ruling empire, the Greeks, Alexander the Great, followed by his 4 generals, and then there would be a 4th world-ruling kingdom, different than all the others. It had this ugly head of fierce and terrible looking, and had iron teeth, and it was represented by the legs, which, having 2 legs, represented the eastern and western division of the Roman Empire, coming right down to the feet with the 10 toes, picturing a time yet ahead of us. So we go all the way back to King Nebuchadnezzar, and we go to a time that hasn't happened yet with those feet, where 10 kings, pictured by the 5 toes on the one foot, on the one leg, and 5 toes of the other foot on the other leg, representing 5 from the east, 5 from the west. And within each of those, none of them are going to get along. Like iron and clay doesn't mix. None of those 10 kings really get along. But for 1 hour, they give their power to a beast that's now in the abyss, healing, awaiting his time to ascend. As Revelation 17 verse 8 puts it, to ascend out of that abyss that's rendered as bottomless pit in the King James Version of the Bible. And so that's where we are right now in prophecy. We're waiting for that beast to ascend, and when he does ascend, that is the beginning and the opening of the fifth seal. And with the opening of the fifth seal is the beginning of the great tribulation, of the great part of the tribulation. Some of it may begin in a small way before that, but it's going to hit the fan when that beast ascends out of the abyss. So that all ties in with the Roman Empire, the fourth kingdom, and those 10 toes, because those 10 toes select that last beast, that seventh king of Revelation 17, verse 10, which says there are 7 kings. We could flip over there for just a second. If I can keep from knocking the camera off the stand here. Let's turn over to Revelation 17:10. We'll come back to Daniel, pick up where we left off last time. It's important to see how these relate to one another. What we're covering in Daniel is not just Old Testament, it's prophecies for these latter days that relate to things God had the Apostle John record in Revelation, that he had Jesus Christ reveal in these latter days through his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. Now we can see in verse 10 of Revelation 17, and there are 7 kings. And there's several parts of this verse that are very interesting. They change, not gender, but they change their sense from present to past tense to future tense to present perfect tense and future perfect tense. There are 7 kings. At the time the Apostle John wrote this verse, again in 90 AD, back on the Isle of Patmos, these 7 kings hadn't even been born yet. They wouldn't be born for some more than 400 years. But then come 554, the first of them has not only been born, but he comes into power as the one who restores the imperial form of government to the Roman Empire. That was Justinian, which he, in 554 AD, he restored the imperial form of government to the Roman Empire. Now, what does that mean, the imperial form of government? We used to, in the church, have, at our headquarters, we had an imperial high school. Well, at that imperial high school, the head of the church appointed the man who was what you would call in normal school terms a principal. That principal, picked teachers, and of course Mr. Armstrong even had a hand in that and approved who those teachers and instructors were. I had an opportunity for a couple of years to be one of the instructors at Imperial High School, and a privilege I really enjoyed, and classes I enjoyed teaching. But imperial form of the government means a religious leader appoints your government leaders. And so that's what happened with Justinian. We had the involvement of the Catholic Church and the Vatican and its representative, a pope, holding the coronation ceremony and putting the crown on the head of Justinian, 554 AD. Now that date is important because there's a 1260-year prophecy that begins with 554. And it goes through, let's look at the next part of this verse. There are 7 kings. The very next part says, 5 are fallen. Now that's referring to 5 of those 7 kings. 5 of those 7 kings, it says, are fallen. Again, at the time when the Apostle John wrote this on the Isle of Patmos, after having had his vision of being taken to heaven and Christ stripping the seals off the book of Revelation and giving things for John to write down. And then, of course, they put the seals on them until the time of the end. And where was I with that? The point being that 5 are fallen. So at the time the Apostle John wrote this, those 5 of the 7 kings hadn't even been born yet. And here it's saying they are fallen, as if it were present tense, they're all are fallen, something that happened in the past, but they haven't even been born yet. So you see, for us today, and for going back to the time of the Apostle John, the verb tense in this verse is going to change all over the place as history and time moves on. So those who try to say from the last book of Revelation, they try to discourage you from listening to Mr. Armstrong, having been given the understanding of end time, of the opening up of the seals and understanding what's happening with them. They try to steer you away from that by calling your attention to the last chapter of Revelation, chapter 22, the last 4 or 5 verses there, which I'll put on the screen here if I can flip to those pages in a moment. All right, here it is right here. The last 4 verses, even 5 verses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the Spirit, verse 17, and the bride say, "Come, let them that hear say, Come, and let him that is athirst come, and whosoever..." Well, all right, this is a time for the future. Whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. That time will come after Christ is returned, but that's a future time. Let's begin with verse 18 and 19, that some people are using to say, don't listen to Mr. Armstrong's understanding of truth. They say, "For I testify unto every man that hears the words of the prophecy of this book." Here's a warning that if any man add into these things, or if any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in the book. So you can't add to it. And verse 19 saying you can't take away from it. "And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life and out of the holy city and from the things which are written in this book." I mention that because people are using that to say the things that God revealed through his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, you can't listen to that. Well, they are actually taking away from the book, because as history goes by, we see the tense of Revelation 17, verse 10, we see the tense change. The part of verse 10 that says, 5 are fallen and 1 is. Now that 1 is probably the most interesting grammar tense changing situation there ever was. Because the Apostle John is writing about king number 6, saying, and 1 is, and king number 6 hasn't even been born yet at the time he wrote that in 90 A.D. Even going through the part about 5 are fallen, well, king number 6 hadn't come along yet to become the 1 is. In 1935, after Garibaldi united Italy and things there, and then allowed the way for Mussolini to come forward and Hitler to hinge to Mussolini, we have Mussolini being given a concordant, a writing by the Vatican saying, yes, you can invade Ethiopia. And so he did that. He conquered Ethiopia. And then you see Mussolini himself announcing himself as the new Il Duce, or the new Julius Caesar, and he even expressly said the words that he had revived the Holy Roman Empire. And that hit the newspapers, but only on the back pages. It wasn't big splash, but God's end-time apostle saw it. God revealed through his end-time apostle that this was, in fact, the fulfillment of the 1 is with Mussolini becoming king number 6. How long did that last? It lasted the same amount of time as the 5th king, Napoleon, was in power and in office. Napoleon came into office in 1804 in the fall, and he ran as the 5th king, the 5th dynasty, as the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire until the spring of 1814. And he lost the empire with the Battle of 1813. The battle that began in the fall of 1813 ended in the spring of 1814. And when you do the arithmetic, you start with the 1814 as the ending year of the Holy Roman Empire, 554 being the beginning year of the Holy Roman Empire, when Justinian restored the imperial form of government, where a Vatican leader appoints the emperor or government leader. You subtract that 554 from the 1814, you get exactly what? 1260. 1,260 continuous years of reign of the Holy Roman Empire. And that fulfilled the time of the first five kings, Justinian through Napoleon. Justinian, Charlemagne, Otto the Great, Charles V was the fourth, and Napoleon was the fifth. From the time when Napoleon lost the Battle of 1813 in the spring of 1814, a year passed by, and then in 1815, Napoleon had scrounged up an army, trained them, and made a comeback effort to try to retake the empire and reestablish the Holy Roman Empire. But he failed so miserably at the Battle of Waterloo that today people, you have a major failure, people today say, hey, you're Waterloo. But we still count the time when the empire ended, the Holy Roman Empire ended, as being 1814, because that's when Napoleon lost the Battle of 1813. His comeback effort meant nothing since he didn't win it. And in fact, he lost it miserably. So you don't look to 1815 because of that reason. You look at 1814 when he lost the Battle of 1813, and that's exactly 1,260 years. People bring up arguments, brethren, of all kinds, to try to argue against the truth God gave us through his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. And thankfully, God's allowed me to be here with you, make a little bit of a comeback effort, and be a little bit successful with that comeback effort. Even though you can bet your boots, and many of you know this, I have my share of enemies out there who love to put down anyone who upholds the truth that God gave us through his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. It behooves you to try to make sure you've got access to recordings by Mr. Armstrong and our literature, the literature that God produced, and especially had Mr. Armstrong write, and some others who were trained by Mr. Armstrong too, and were faithful in it. But let's go back. We got those, I mentioned those 7 kings, 5 are fallen. Napoleon through, I should say it the other way, Justinian through Napoleon, because Justinian was first, then Charlemagne, then Otto the Great, then Charles V, then Napoleon. Those 5 are fallen, and then Mussolini comes along as the one is between 1935 and 1945, during the beginning of God's end-time apostles' ministry. And he was able to announce that, establish himself as a the W word, as a witness for God, and then have more than 50 years of successful ambassadorship, preaching the truth of God and opening up the understanding and being used by God to build a church. And I'm not talking about a church building or the auditorium or the ambassador auditorium or anything like that, or even an organization like what was called the Worldwide Church of God, a corporate structure, a corporate organism, or I should say a corporate organization. But the church is, as you see in 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, are the members, the body, the people God called. That's the church, and God built up a body of people, the body of Christ, through his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. That's why many of you who understand and have the truth have it today. Now, maybe you learned it through someone who was trained under Mr. Armstrong, a minister or a teacher, a college instructor, even friends, maybe even magazines, Plain Truth Magazine or other publications. You're getting that truth that you have and understand. You got it through God's end-time apostle who was given to whom it was given by inspiration and opening up the mind and understanding of Herbert Armstrong from Jesus Christ and the understanding of the writings of Daniel and the Apostle John. And God made Herbert Armstrong an end-time apostle. All right, now, let's see. Let's come back because I want to try to pick up in Daniel. We left off again after Daniel explains the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar and how that statue represented 4 world-ruling emperors, and King Nebuchadnezzar being the first, and then the Medes and Persians, Darius being next, and then Alexander the Great and his 4 generals, and then the Roman Empire. And it's coming into an association with a little horn that is a representative of the Vatican and the Catholic Church that did this coronation, held the coronation ceremonies, crowning most, if not all, of the emperors of the dynasties of the Holy Roman Empire. And they did most of those in Frankfurt, Germany, in the Romer building, which is up on and in what's called well, it's slipping my tongue at the moment. On the second floor of the Romer building, many of you know this, it's the place where they hold the coronation ceremonies for the kings, and it's the Emperor's Hall. That's on the second floor of the Romer building. A pope, during the time of each new emperor, would travel to Frankfurt, Germany, and even though that building was blown up toward the end of World War II, it was rebuilt thanks to the wonderful people of America. I'm saying that partly in tongue-in-cheek, through the Marshall's Plan, providing the money to rebuild exactly according to old architectural plans that building and the Emperor's Hall. And it's some of the statues that were destroyed were refashioned and reshaped and put back in that building, statues of kings and emperors of that Holy Roman Empire. And so that'll probably be the place of the future for the coronation ceremony for this beast that becomes king number 7, that fulfills Revelation 17:10 and says, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, so that's a total of 6 so far. You got 5 fallen and 1 is, he's now fallen too, so 5 and 1 is 6, and the other is not yet come. That other that's not yet come is king number 7. There's 7 kings, 5 and 1 that have come and gone, equals 6, and 6 from 7 leaves 1, and the other, the one that's yet to come, is your king number 7. And verse 8 of Revelation 17 talks about that king number 7 being like king number 6 in the sense that those two in duality do this thing in verse 8 of Revelation 17. They are talked about as ascending out of the abyss. Now you see it says the word bottomless pit here in the King James Version, but that original word for bottomless pit is abyss. The word that former German Chancellor Angela Merkel mentioned when she screamed and hollered at the members of Parliament of the UK back during the time of Brexit, and all the falderall that went along with that. She reminded them that they are messing with something that's going to be a future beast. She said, "You people better look into the abyss." And again, abyss is the original Hebrew word which Mrs. Merkel was very familiar with from East Germany, her father having been an evangelical preacher as she grew up. And what she was basically saying, folks, is you better look for the coming ascension of a beast out of the abyss to become the 7th king, the final dynasty, who will revive for its last time what is called the Holy Roman Empire. And when that emperor is crowned as God's end-time apostle has explained, that will be the opening of the fifth seal, and that will be the beginning of the Great Tribulation. That will also be the beginning of the time of the two witnesses. It starts a 3.5 year, a 1260 day, a 42-month time period where several things happen all at one time, and they're all happening. Their 3.5 years, their 42 months, their 1260 days are all one contiguous period of time, with all of those things happening at the same time. The Great Tribulation running 3.5 years, the two end-time witnesses of Revelation 11 doing their witness and their testimony for 3.5 years, the same 3.5 years. Not one doing one period of 3.5 years and another doing another period of 3.5. No, the very same time period of 3.5 years. You got two witnesses testifying. You got the Great Tribulation occurring. You've got the Laodicean era. It's a 3.5 year era. It's not here now. Every single splinter group out there, every named vanity plate Church of God group out there is, as a policy, now there may be some individual ministers within a group that know the truth and will pull you aside and tell you the truth. But their organization that they've made themselves a part of are all preaching and listing on their websites that we are in the Laodicean era now. That teaching is contrary to and in direct opposition to what God's end-time apostle taught us, that the Laodicean era commences when the fifth seal opens up, when the Great Tribulation begins, when those who are left behind. Read Revelation 12, beginning in verse 14 through 16. You see that there are some people who are in the style of Luke 21:36, who do the watching and praying and receive the promise of being accounted worthy to escape all that's going to happen, beginning with the fifth seal, Great Tribulation, and are accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man in the first resurrection, and those two things go hand in hand. You see that they are flown on two wings of a great eagle, verse 14 of Revelation 12. You see that they are chased by the devil in verse 15 of Revelation 12. And then you see that the devil's army, who chases those accounted worthy to escape, are swallowed up in a sinkhole in verse 16 of Revelation 12. And then in the last verse of Revelation 12, in verse 17, you see a people who were not accounted worthy to escape. Those people that fly on two wings of a great eagle in verse 14, chased by the devil in verse 15, the devil's army swallowed up in verse 16. Mr. Armstrong saw that just like ancient Israel and Moses and Pharaoh's army chasing ancient Israel, and God opening up the Red Sea, letting ancient Israel get safely through the Red Sea, just like he's going to get those accounted worthy safely through the walls of Petra and into the land that's east of the Jordan River, Edom, Moab, what's north of there, Ammon, all that area mentioned in Daniel 11, verse 40. And then God's going to swallow up in a sinkhole the army of the devil in Revelation 12, verse 16, just like he did with Pharaoh's army when God closed up the Red Sea and let it drown Pharaoh's army. Same thing, duality and prophecy. Ancient Israel, future spiritual Israel, those who are counted worthy to escape. Presently, in the Church of God, which is today scattered, it's not one group anywhere. There are people who are God's people, and they're scattered. They're all over the place. Some may be in one group, some may be in another group. And even though that group is teaching things contrary to what God's end-time apostle gave us as truth, you're going to find some people in there that are doing their best to try to stick to the truth. And I know, because some of them contact me and tell me what's in their head and what's going on for them, even though the leaders they sit under are not teaching the truth. They're telling you the Laodicean era is here now, and those men are not listening. They're not staying faithful. They're not teaching as they were taught, as instructed in God's word to do. We're to teach as we were taught. We are to, 1 Corinthians 1, chapter 1, verse 10, we are to all speak the same thing, be of one mind, one body, one spirit. And if we are of that one spirit, we're going to be led by that one spirit to speak the same thing, to stay with the truth as we were taught. And if you're not doing that, you yourself are not only in trouble, you're in a whole heap of trouble if you're teaching other people and you're causing some to stumble and fall. God says it'd be better that you were never born or that you would be drowned in the sea. But, all right, let's pick up now. On a positive note, and there is very positive instruction in Daniel. The understanding to know the four kingdoms, world-ruling kingdoms, and this last one, the Roman Empire, with those feet and a seventh king that's yet to ascend out of the abyss and become the next world-ruling emperor over the Holy Roman Empire, king of the north, that will eventually dominate the world after he has battle with the king of the south. And the only place on the face of the earth that will be outside the reach of the king of the north, as God records it in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 and 41, is the land east of the Jordan River. You can read it in that verse. It's described as the land of the children of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. And at the southern tip of Edom is Petra, which has those big rock walls and a narrow passageway that reminded Mr. Armstrong of the narrow passageway through the Red Sea that ancient Israel traversed, and that the future spiritual Israel will traverse as the devil chases them into a place of nourishment, a place of 3.5 years of protection. That's part of the same 3.5 years protection of those who are counted worthy to escape, 2 witnesses testifying, great tribulation occurring. Other than the 2 witnesses testifying to the world, it'll be a time of the famine of the word plus an additional 75 days. It starts at the 1335 when men will no longer have access to the truth God gave us through Mr. Armstrong. It'll be cut off. And then during the 1290, between the 1290 and 1260, those accounted worthy to escape will be informed, shown 2 wings of a great eagle that they can hop aboard and be flown to the Middle East. Now, not directly into the land east of the Jordan River, because you first of all got to watch for an army to surround Jerusalem, the abomination that makes desolate, and then flee, as Christ instructed, to the mountains that are east of the Jordan River, south of Jerusalem, a distance a few miles less than the distance that ancient Israel traveled from Egypt to the Red Sea. And they did that in 6 days. And you've got between the 1290 and the 1260 to hightail it from Jerusalem, if that's where you are, to the mountains east of the Jordan River during this period between 1290 and 1260. You've got to be accounted worthy to escape by God to make it through this and to do this. Or you won't make it. But after you're chased by the devil through the walls of Petra, devil's army swallowed in a sinkhole. Read it, Revelation 12, verses 14 through 16. Then those who remain as the remnant, those who were keeping the commandments of God, as it clearly says in verse 17 of chapter 12 of Revelation. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to flip over there. I'm just a page or 2 away from it. Verse 17 says, and the dragon, now after the dragon's army gets, verse 16, swallowed up in a sinkhole while they're trying to chase those accounted worthy to escape, who are flown, verse 14, on 2 wings of an eagle, the devil gets madder than a wet hornet. I mean, that's my way of thinking of it, based on what God says in verse 17. You people that are calling Revelation 22 down upon some of us who, may use some terms to eloquently or visually have impact in what we're seeing. You're calling upon us Revelation 22, verses 18, 19. Oh, you can't add to the book of Revelation or take away from it. Well, you guys are taking away from it, because this verse 17 says, and the devil was wrath with the woman. And in prophecy, woman is a church. In Revelation 12, it's a true church. It's the true church. And it includes those who are called the remnant of her seed. Her seed referring back to the woman, the true church. Today, there are two categories of people in God's true church. Do you know what they are? Category one are those mentioned in Luke 21:36, those who are accounted worthy to escape. Category two are those mentioned here in verse 17 of Revelation 12, those who are left behind as a remnant, who after those who were accounted worthy to escape, again in verse 14, given 2 wings of an eagle, flown to the Middle East. Then they flee to the mountain. In verse 15, as the devil sends an army, where it mentions of the devil sending a flood, casting out of his mouth water as a flood. That's Old Testament prophecy for an army. It's being used here in the book of Revelation. The devil sends, what it's saying, as God is saying, is the devil sends an army after the woman. And just like Pharaoh sent his army after ancient Israel, the devil sends his army against future spiritual Israel. But he doesn't succeed, just like Pharaoh didn't succeed. God opens up the earth, swallows the devil's army. And so that category of people get safely through the walls of Petra into the land of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, where they are nourished for a time and times and half a time. You'll see in Daniel, a time is as a year. When King Nebuchadnezzar had to go out and be like a beast for 7 years, it mentions him as having to do that for a period of 7 times. And there's another one of the places where a time is a year. But in 17, there's something I'd like you to notice. The dragon, being wroth with the woman, went to make war with the remnant of her seed. Those who were not accounted worthy to escape are the remnant, like a remainder in division, something left behind. And that's the way they're referred to here, as a remnant. And it clearly and expressly, plainly says, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ that is explained in chapter 19 of Revelation. Those who have the testimony of Jesus Christ have the spirit of prophecy. That is a spirit of God, God's Holy Spirit, as opposed to the spirit of Job 32:8, the spirit in man. So they have God's Spirit. They're keeping God's commandments. Well, Stephen, why in the world didn't they get accounted worthy to escape? Well, if you read Luke 21, verse 36, you'll see that there's 2 prerequisites to be accounted worthy to escape, which is worded as here as being accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, beginning with the 5th seal, great tribulation. You've got to do the 2 prerequisites of that verse: watch and pray. And so logic tells you pretty obviously those people keeping God's commandments, even really going to some of the best feast sites in the world, were very likely not watching and not praying as they should. They were lukewarm about it. So if that's you, and it could be me, we need to get our act together and be sure we are following that instruction of Jesus Christ. We should we not, brethren, also be doing what Christ said in Matthew 24, around verse 15, 16, somewhere in that area, where he's instructed us to pray that our flight, referring to this Revelation 12:14 flight on the wings of 2 eagles, be not in the winter nor on the Sabbath. And we're instructed to be praying. And now that we're in the middle of a cold winter and snow predicted to come through North Carolina, who knows, maybe even at the time I'm speaking here tonight, Friday night Bible study time, it may have already hit, may not, but it's predicted as a great possibility for us to have some snowstorms. And let's see, I'm trying to find where Christ says it. Verse 15, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. That not only happened in 70 A.D., that's a future prophecy for us, for those who are counted worthy to escape. We're then to flee to the mountains of Petra, be chased by an army of the devil, and that army of the devil will be swallowed up. And then he gets extremely angry, as we were pointing out, goes after the remnant, and his going after them is through this Holy Roman Empire, where they are instructed they have to work on the Sabbath, they have to bow down before the image of the beast. We're going to see an example of bowing down before the image of the beast in the book of Daniel, if I stop this diversion and get over to it. But I did want to try to back up. Verse 20, Matthew 24, is where Christ says, but pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath. So there's that instruction for us today to be praying that our flight, this Revelation 12:14 flight on two wings of a great eagle, that it be not in the winter. You have to be outdoors, and being outdoors in cold weather, you can get very badly sick. All right, some of you may be hearing it. I have a little bit of a sore throat and some congestion myself. I got a towel here by me, and once in a while I'm wiping my nose. But you don't want to be out there in the winter, and Christ instructs us to be wise. And while we're in the midst of winter, be praying every day, brethren, that our flight be not in the winter. Things are ripe. They could blow at any moment. And so if you're wise, you're going to be saying, hey, God, not now, not during the winter. Hold it off to springtime at least. And then let me get my act together between now and spring and be watching world news and praying about the people affected by it, that I might be accounted worthy to escape. Okay, we do have a little time left where I can pick up where we left off here in chapter 2, where Daniel has explained the four world-ruling empires, and he explained how Christ would return as the stone that smashes that statue on its feet, and with the feet crushed, we stand up on our feet. If we have a sore toe or a sore foot, well, you can't walk, and if you were to have those things cut off, like smashing them, you're probably going to fall down. And so that statue is going to fall, which represents the governments of this world, and be replaced by that stone that smashed them, representing Jesus Christ. So that's where we got to last week. Then, verse 46, King Nebuchadnezzar, many people of you and myself and a friend today I was speaking with, we hadn't quite caught this, or if we read this, now look, I've gone through the entire Bible probably 7 or 8 times, or maybe even more. But it's been a little while since I did that, where I did a daily reading to, in 1 year, plunge through the entire Bible. So I've read every verse at least once, more than one time. And yet, you'll forget these things. As my friend mentioned this morning, how King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and worshiped Daniel. Some of us either may have forgotten that or didn't remember it, or maybe even never knew it. And then the king makes a command that they should offer an oblation, a sacrifice, and sweet odors unto Daniel. And because of what God did through Daniel, Daniel is about to be blessed by God through King Nebuchadnezzar, where the king in verse 47 answers to Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings. The one who's the Lord is the one who reigns over, and in this case, the Lord, God, reigns and rules over kings. And your God is a revealer of secrets, seeing you could reveal this secret. None of the King Nebuchadnezzar's magicians could tell the dream about the statue, the great statue of chapter 2 of Daniel 2, nor truthfully reveal what that dream was. And King Nebuchadnezzar recognized that God did it through Daniel. And then verse 48, the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. And in verse 49, Daniel makes a request of the king that his buddies, his peers, those kids that were brought into Babylon with Daniel, that they be made the overseers. Let's read verse 49, see how it says it. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he sat Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. All right, now we pick up with chapter 3. All right, so I gave you a little history. We tied it into Revelation because of these governments that are going to be smashed in the feet when Christ returns. And just before Christ returns, 3.5 years before he returns, when those 10 toes select the seventh king, when they select an emperor who will be that beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit for the second time in duality, with the first time being the ascension by Mussolini, lasting 9.5 years, the same length of time Napoleon had his reign as emperor, 9.5 years. And Napoleon reigned from 1804, the fall of 1804, to the spring of 1814. That's 9.5 years if you count it out. Mussolini had his reign as emperor, the sixth king, between the fall of 1935 and the spring of 1945. Same exact period of time, 9.5 years as Napoleon. And Mussolini represented the first ascension of the beast from the abyss, fulfilling Revelation 17, verse 8, in its first time as a type of what would happen in a bigger way in the future, just ahead of us, with a second king ascending out of the bottomless pit, becoming the seventh king total of the seven kings that are mentioned in Revelation 17, verse 10. There are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is Mussolini. He's come and gone. His time ended in 1945. And now the beast is not killed. Mussolini was killed April 28, 1945, but his death did not represent the death of the Holy Roman Empire or its emperors or leaders. His death only represented a wounding, a mortal wound, but a wounding of the emperor, the leader of the Holy Roman Empire. And chapter 17 of Revelation and verse 8 talks about duality, another king that will become the one, the other is not yet come, as verse 10 says. Well, my fingers are a little sticky, and I had a little trouble getting that one open, but you can see it in your Bible. I'll show it to you in this little Bible right here on this page. Chapter 17, verse 10. There are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is. That was Mussolini. He's now was. And and look, you guys with Revelation 22 that say you can't add to or take away, the tense and verse that John wrote in 90 AD when he said one is was not is yet then. So you guys got to wake up and you got to realize you got to watch history. You got to watch time and things as they develop. And the one is only had a 9.5 year period of time when it was is. Before that, it wasn't yet is. It wasn't yet. Mussolini was not yet in power to be the one is. And after April 28, 1945, he no longer was the one is. He became the one that was. And before that, he was the one that would be. So you guys trying to use Revelation 22, verses 18, 19 to say you can't listen to God's end-time apostle, the truth God gave us, and opened up the seals through him. You need to get your heads out of the sand and realize, God did strip the seals and give the truth to us through Mr. Armstrong. As he promised, he would have somebody, as he promised to do in the latter days. And it happened to be done through God's end-time apostle, Herbert W. Armstrong. As much as some of you hate that, that's the way God did it. I'm not going to apologize for that. If you don't like that, I honestly feel sorry for you, because you got a very bad attitude and you're on the bad side of the eternal Lord God. But here we have 7 kings, 5 fallen, 1 is, and here's the important part for us right now, because this is where we are right now. The other is not yet come. That'll be king number 7. That'll be the second beast to ascend, verse 8, out of the bottomless pit. The beast that you saw was active between 554 and 1814. Then we had over 100 years between 1814 and 1935 that the beast is not. Now, he wasn't dead, but he was wounded, and therefore he was not in office. There was no Holy Roman Empire between 1814 and 1935. Then there was a Holy Roman Empire for 10 years, 9.5 years, from 1935 to 1945. And now we're in the is not part again. The Holy Roman Empire is not, but it's not dead. Its leader has a mortal wound, but is being healed. And those 10 toes, who are 10 concurrent kings of the image in Daniel chapter 2, they are also the 10 horns of the beast of Revelation 13 that ascends. Not out of the ocean, but that is the land beast that is spoken of starting in verse 11 of Revelation 13. Revelation 13 talks of 2 beasts, one that from the ocean that goes back to King Nebuchadnezzar and goes through the last horn that pictures that beast from the land, that has your 7 heads, 6 that have come and gone from Justinian through Mussolini, and the other, that 7th head, the great, that's got 10 horns on it that are going to be ridden by a woman, a little horn, is your beast of the land. They're described in Revelation 13, beginning in verse 11. And that beast is the same picturing as the second king that ascends out of the bottomless pit, becomes king number 7 of Revelation 10, and is the king of the north of the Great Tribulation. So I hope, brethren, you understand that, and that's also pictured here by Daniel with those 10 toes that represents those 10 kings that give their power to the beast that becomes that 7th king. All right, now I was trying to pick up here in chapter 3, and we're going to cover just a little bit of this and then wrap up until the morning. Chapter 3 points out that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, he makes this image of gold. Now remember, in the earlier chapter 2, he's seen a dream that has a head of gold on it, and God through Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, you are this head of gold. You are the leader, the emperor of a Holy Roman Empire." Well, Nebuchadnezzar, he likes that. He likes that so much, and now the dream that troubled him is like, hot dog, I'm the hot shot, I'm the big cheese of this dream. I am this head of gold. So what does he do? Look at this. Verse 1 of chapter 3 says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. And that image of gold represents him. So, oh boy, is he happy as a lark. And he made it 90 feet tall. It says here in the King James Version that image of gold had a height that was 80 cubits. Well, you look that up in Dake's Annotated Reference or other ways to check it, and online now, just search it in Google, you find out 80 is 60. 60 cubits equals about 90 feet. And this verse 1 says, and the breadth thereof was 6 cubits. That'd be probably about 9 feet, or roughly somewhere in that ballpark. And Nebuchadnezzar set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And verse 2 shows how he gathered together his princes, his governors, all the leaders of Babylon, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, picturing himself that head of gold. Then the princes, the governors, verse 3, and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image of Nebuchadnezzar the king, that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, that head of gold in the desert there, Dura, 90 feet tall. And they stood before the image, that big 90-foot image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then, verse 4, and herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the cornet, the sound of music, the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackcloth, or sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. So this big announcement was made that when you hear the music, the sound of music, you got to fall down and worship this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And verse 6, who doesn't do this? Whosoever won't do it, who won't fall down and worship, shall the same hour, now get that, the very same hour, be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And verse 7, therefore at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, what happened to the dulcimer? They left that word out here in this verse. All the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore, verse 8, at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. And guess who they're accusing? They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, psaltery, sackbut, and dulcimer, they got the dulcimer back in here now, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. Verse 11, and whosoever falleth not down and worship, who doesn't do this, who won't bow down and worship and fall down and worship the image of the beast, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. They remind the king of this, and then they begin their plot against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as they say, verse 12, there are certain Jews whom you, O great king Nebuchadnezzar, set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded you. They serve not your gods, nor worship the golden image which you set up. Oh boy, that did it. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Now, do you notice something here? Daniel is not mentioned. Daniel is not brought with his buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I just mentioned that to you because as a friend of mine and I watched a movie called Daniel, when the guys were thrown into the fiery furnace, and there were 4 people there, and one of them was a lot bigger than the other one. It mentions how there were 3 thrown into the fiery furnace, and then this 4th one comes along. That 4th one was not Daniel. That 4th one was described as an angel of God, which could have been Jesus Christ himself, who kept those men from being burned. Even their clothes were not singed. Well, that's coming up in this very chapter here in a moment. So let's continue. We'll pick up there in a second. Nebuchadnezzar, in his fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not Daniel with them, but just those 3. Then they brought these men before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar spoke unto them and asked them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you guys do not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, he's going to, in his mind, give them a chance, an opportunity to bow down and worship this pagan image. Well, you know, It was tied in with the head of gold in the image King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream as being something good, the first world-ruling emperor. But then he gets in the act, makes an idol out of it, just makes this image of gold to picture himself and wants people to worship the image, which God says in one of his commands, don't worship idols. And so the king is chiding them, if you be ready at what time you hear the music, the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, and the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, if you'll do this and be ready to fall down and worship the image which I've made, you do well. Well, he says, but if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Whoa, boy, now he's talking language that the great God is saying, oh, you're going to put me down now. Who shall deliver you out of my hands? Verse 16 reveals how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer you in this matter. They're basically saying, we don't have to give any regard to you on this. It was a firm, kind of an insult back to the king, but they were honoring God by doing it, saying, we don't have to regard you in this matter, king. And they say in verse 17, if it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from this burning fiery furnace you're going to throw us into, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. As they spoke that, they're in essence really saying, even if you burn us up, God delivers us out of your hand in so doing, and he's going to resurrect us. They knew that. But they also were saying, God might deliver us out of your hand, as he did. But, verse 18, if not, they take it this way too. If not, great king, be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you set up. Oh boy, this really did the trick. Now, verse 19, then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The form of his vision being changed, I think many of us have heard about, or even seen somebody's face turn blood red when they get angry. And this king, so it was kind of like that. The form of his vision was changed. He was so angry that he goes and tells the men that, let's see, where did I leave off here? Verse 19, the form of his vision was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore, he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace, this fiery furnace that they were normally just throwing the guys into. The king told them to heat that thing up 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And verse 20, he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then verse 21, these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, verse 22, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, 7 times hotter than usual, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The very men that threw Daniel's 3 friends into the fiery furnace were burned up from outside the furnace. The thing was so hot. And verse 23, these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound, into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then, verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonied. That's an old English word that we would today probably say astonished. Doesn't mean he got drunk and stoned, but he was astonied. He was just amazed. Life became like a drunk man. Was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, didn't we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose. Now that 4th man was not Daniel. There was Daniel's 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He saw 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. And that was quite probably Jesus Christ himself. Then, verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come forth, come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And verse 27, the princes, governors, captains, the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, nor the smell of fire, neither were their clothes, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed upon them, not even the smell of fire on them. Then, verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Again, do you notice Daniel's not involved here on this one? He escaped this one. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel, which again probably was Jesus Christ, perhaps, very likely was Jesus Christ, and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed. I know it doesn't actually say that here, but it kind of alludes to it in many ways. Mr. Armstrong has alluded to it. We're not violating Revelation 22. We're not changing God's word if we say it probably was Christ, So we didn't say it says that exactly, but it probably was. Why wouldn't it be? Okay, I know the actual word rendered here is angel, but it still could have been Christ. And delivered his servants that trusted him and have changed the king's word. Let's back that up. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel. That God has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies. The king said they'd be thrown into a burning fiery furnace, but when they weren't burned up in the fiery furnace, it actually equated out to changing the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own. So as I pause for a moment to give you a thought about that great God that even King Nebuchadnezzar recognized in this moment, we're going to see a certain little change later. Oh, I tried too many times. I put in the wrong password. Now it's locked me out. It's going to make me wait before I can put that back on. We're about to finish up here. We're at our limit of time anyway, so I think we're still alive, but we lost our monitor here. So let me finish this up. So Nebuchadnezzar said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, verse 29, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then, verse 30, last verse of chapter 3 of Daniel. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. All right, we're going to cut off right there, and we'll pick up with chapter 4 in the morning, and we'll see in chapter 4 what's referred to as the dream about the great tree, a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. I think that's chapter 4. Wait a minute. Let me see. Is that great tree in chapter 5? Oh, let's see. It's my other Bible. I have this picture of a great tree drawn, but we can see in the wording of chapter 4 just where we're going to be going. Yeah, the tree grew, was strong, and it's called great. And so we're going to read about the dream of the great tree when we come back next time. And then we'll get to chapter 5. We'll probably get to chapter 4 and 5 next time. And, chapter 5, we see that handwriting on the wall. And that's a very interesting story. It's a great one for the kids and for all kids, whether you be age 5 or 105 or somewhere in between. Brother, I want to thank you for joining me tonight for this Friday night Bible study, again, on this 8th day. Let's do it the other way. On this 25th day of the 8th month on God's holy sacred calendar, it was until midnight, the way pagan Rome does it, until midnight tonight. It is you know what? I think I just gave you the date wrong. It's the 25th day of the 8th month on God's holy sacred calendar. Please pardon me. We only have 4 more days to go in this 8th month. Then we've got all of the 9th month, all of the 10th month, all of the 11th month, all of the 12th month. This is not an extended year. There's no 13th month this year. Then we have halfway into the first month until the 14th for the most solemn feast of the entire year of all the feasts, the night of the Passover memorial. So we have at least 4.5 months and a few extra days before the next feast day. And all right, so it's the 25th day of the 8th month on the God's holy sacred calendar, and it is the 18th day of November 2022 on the pagan Roman calendar. I think I have that right. And so I want to thank you for joining us tonight, brethren, friends, for this Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study. And thank God we're able to continue this tradition that God's end-time apostle began back in Pasadena many years ago of having a Bible study on the eve of Sabbath on a Friday night. And we use the world's term Friday night Bible study. That's what we called it back then. It actually would begin many times before the Sabbath began, because Friday night we always started it at 7:30. Sometimes the sun wouldn't be set till 8 or after 8, so technically it was not the Sabbath yet, but it was Friday night. Anyway, thank you for joining me for this one tonight. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll try to be back with you in the morning for a Sabbath service. And until then, I wish you a wonderful good night of rest. This is a time we are not to do any servile work. We are to rest and worship our Creator, and we should spend some time reverencing Him and being ready to worship Him during the daytime in the morning. Not tomorrow, because as of sunset tonight, it became the Sabbath. And it isn't tomorrow in the morning, it's just in the morning. I know we go from Friday night on the pagan Roman calendar. At midnight, we change to what they call a new day, and they call it Saturday. But it's all been Sabbath since sunset tonight, wherever you are. And then wherever you are and wherever Mrs. Calabash is, we wish you a happy Sabbath and Shabbat Shalom. Until next time, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath to you.